On today's show, it's time for another Locked On Bucks, Locked On Celtics crossover. And at the moment, this week at least, Bucks and the Celtics staying out of the news and letting another team in particular take all the headlines. But it has been a while since we've chatted Bucks and Celtics together. The Bucks have a new head coach. The Celtics made a major trade in the offseason. So there's plenty to catch up on with Locked On Bucks and Locked On Celtics. I'm Kane Pittman. That's John Corrales. And John, it has been a little while. And unfortunately, since the last time we chatted, both of our teams made an earlier than expected exit, or earlier than expected, earlier than hoped exit for the postseason. We'll say that.
Yeah, I'd say that's a fair way to characterize how both postseasons went. I will say the Celtics a little later than the Bucks,
but a lot later.
But still, it easily could have been reversed with the Celtics and the Bucks kind of like jockeying for top seed position. Yeah, I wouldn't have been surprised if the Celtics met with Miami in the first round, and who knows how that would have gone. My personal opinion is that the Tyler Hero injury started this cascading kind of Milwaukee run that made, the Miami run that made no sense. So I don't know how it would have gone otherwise, but yeah, it was two kind of rough off seasons that saw two teams at the top make major changes. You change your head coach, you trade your starting point guard, the longest tenured member of the team. I'd say those are major changes.
I would agree with you, and I'm going to start with a question around that trade for the Boston Celtics. But first, we should say that we thank everyone for making Locked On Bucks or Locked On Celtics your first listen Monday to Friday, right through the offseason as well. And just when you think there's no headlines, we have something like the James Harden situation go down. So you know that you're getting the perspective from Boston, the perspective from Milwaukee when stuff like that happens. So we appreciate the support. Drop a like, a comment, subscribe, rate, review, do all those things. It's free to do. And it helps both of our shows grow. So we appreciate it. As far as the Boston Celtics, though, and again, we look at it at Locked On Bucks and we say, okay, what does this mean for Milwaukee? Clearly, the Bucks and the Celtics over the years have been on a collision course in the postseason. We thought maybe we're heading that way this season again. So can you just break down from the Boston perspective, was this trade a long time coming? It felt like potentially Marcus Smart was always in the mix, but now to go down the path of bringing in another five with Porzingis, what's the thought process here?
I think the thought process is twofold for Boston. One, they're going with Joe Missoula. Joe Missoula is, he got the team under rough circumstances beginning of last season, was elevated midway through the season, and now there's no doubt that they're going full bore Missoula ball, which is more spread, which is more 3-point heavy, which is less point guard driven, setting your team up from the top of the key. And one of the things that I had been saying on Locked On Celtics is Celtics had two choices during the season. They either, and what they did at the beginning of the season was what I'm saying here. The first point, go with Marcus Smart as your basically your point guard, your starting point guard, run the offense through him, run pick and rolls, have Tatum and Brown off the ball, kind of catching the ball on the move, and just have that ball movement, just quick, 0.5 basketball, and run your offense that way, which was successful at the beginning of the year. Or you go through Tatum and Brown and you kind of have a group of people bringing the ball up, but Tatum and Brown do a bulk of it, and you move Marcus Smart. If you're going to have Tatum and Brown bringing the ball up and have Smart in the corner spotting up, well, he's just not a good enough shooter, and that goes back to using him in the worst way possible. And they decided to lean into having Tatum and Brown bring the ball up, and that made Smart kind of expendable. On top of that, the second part is the Celtics' failures at the ends of shot clocks, at the end of games. The Celtics have not been able to really figure out how to close games and how to kind of manage the end of shot clock. And Porzingis comes in as a kind of last resort option in those situations where Tatum and Brown can dump it into him. His post-up numbers last season were off the charts. Historically, they haven't been. So there's you're kind of hoping that last season was the breakout and beginning of something new versus the aberration. But at the end of a shot clock, when the Celtics all of a sudden find themselves with 7 seconds left and now they're stuck after their first action doesn't work, now you can get it to Porzingis and at least you can get a decent shot off because he's 7'3" and he's going to shoot over the top of just about everybody in the league. So leaning into Missoula ball, getting one of your worst shooters off, not really focusing too much on the defense, what Marcus Smart excelled at, focusing more offense first, spreading the floor, which Porzingis can obviously do, and then giving Tatum and Brown that option to dump it into him late in clocks when they get double teamed or whatever. And maybe he can prevent some of that double teaming as well. I think that's all part of why Porzingis, when he became available, became such an enticing option for Boston.
Okay, so two-part question then. Where do you sit on this change or leaning into the Missoula ball as you described? And then what is your sense from your listeners? And I'm sure it's mixed like it always is, but is there a consensus on, yep, all right, we're happy to move on to this phase and go down this path or not?
No, there's no consensus. There never is a consensus. And Marcus Smart is a bit of a polarizing player.
Yeah.
Now, I happen to be a very pro Marcus Smart guy.
Mm-hmm.
I think he's a really, really good point guard. He's a tremendous passer. Obviously, the shooting has something to be desired, but if he is starting at the top of the key and running an offense and passing out of the pick and roll, he's very, very good at that. And if you limit the shot opportunities, he can actually hit a few of those shots. The shots that drag his percentage down, I think, are the times where he thinks, okay, I've got to bail these guys out. And so I don't know if that's going to be the case on Memphis. We'll see, but I think he's a really, really good point guard. And the people who agree with me are like, oh, this sucks. But if you're going to go with Missoula and that's going to be the team direction, whether I agree with it or not, now this is what it is. So because they're going with Missoula, because they're leaning into this, then I do agree that Marcus Smart doesn't fit that quite as well. So as much as I wanted Boston to play a different style, now that they have decided not to play that style, I have to admit, like, okay, well, I can't get mad at trading Marcus Smart because he doesn't fit what you're trying to do. So I can be mad at what you're trying to do, but now if I'm analyzing it from how do you move forward from this, then Smart being out and Porzingis being in, that makes a lot of sense because you don't lose much as far as, defensively. Yeah, you lose something on the perimeter, but you gain something at the rim. So by having Porzingis at the rim, you inherently make the perimeter defenders a little bit better because I think drivers are going to be a little more scared, especially if Robert Williams is back there as well, a little more afraid of attacking the rim. So it makes your perimeter defenders a little bit better. Porzingis can pull up from 25 feet, no problem. He's got a quick release. So he can play the 5 out. If you want to play with Porzingis and 4 wings and guards, you can do that. You can post him up. So in the style of offense first, Joe Mazzulla preferred basketball, especially when you bring in some of these assistant coaches, a guy we poached from the Milwaukee Bucks, Charles Lee, which I think is going to be huge for them defensively, and Sam Cassell, that experience that they bring, I think that all adds up to being a net positive for this direction that Boston's going.
So I'm glad that you mentioned the coaching staff there because I do want to ask you about the challenges of a new head coach. The Bucks obviously bring in Adrian Griffin, and then maybe you can flip it to me towards some Bucks thoughts that you may have as well. But we're going to continue that after we talk about FanDuel Sportsbook, the sponsor of today's podcast. And football season is about to kick off, and FanDuel is giving you the chance to win all season long because right now, when you bet on the Super Bowl winner, you can get bonus bets every time they win in the regular season. Just pick any team to win the Super Bowl, and you'll get bonus bets back for every victory. You can use your bonus bets on spreads, player props, over and unders, and more. So visit FanDuel.com/lockedon, and you can get started there. And I've been referencing the last couple of weeks, FIBA World Cup coming up, USA the favorites. Canada, no Jamal Murray. They're now equal second favorite with France and Australia. Just a big injury blow overnight. Jock Landale not looking good for the Aussies, but they're the fourth favorite for the tournament as well. So you can get all the FIBA World Cup odds at FanDuel. So as I said, FanDuel.com/lockedon. That's America's #1 sportsbook. Remember, FanDuel.com/lockedon to get started. Keep it locked on Bucks and locked on Celtics over the next few weeks, and we will be rolling through the FIBA World Cup off-season content. Before we know it, training camps will be here, and the regular season will tip off. So we're just starting to warm up a little bit on the Locked On Podcast Network. So make sure you keep checking out both of these shows. A new head coach, John.
Yeah.
Now, this is the only pushback I've got, and you see it a little bit. Well, the Bucks are just running it back, same thing, same team. There's a significant change when you change the head coach. They were so sturdy, they were so steady with Mike Budenholzer on the sideline, whether you liked him or didn't like him. Before, maybe you've got some questions about the Bucks. Joe Missoula. Now, this was a very different situation.
Yes.
But we've discussed on this podcast, certainly I have, expect some teething problems and some growing pains, perhaps, as Adrian Griffin tries to figure out the way he wants to play, playing around Giannis, some of the new players that will be coming off the bench. What was, and there were a lot of challenges through the year, but what was it like with a new head coach in that circumstance, trying to work through some of these kinks? Because let's be honest, it took the majority, if not all, of the season.
Yeah, it's tough for, and now it is a very different circumstance.
Yes,
because Missoula got the team days before media day. He didn't hire his own staff. He kind of went in with Ime Udoka's plans and tried to tweak them accordingly from there. So it's hard to make the apples to apples comparison. But the first time head coach is going to need help from his players and from his staff. And I think one of the things that hurt Missoula last season was the confusion around the circumstances. And if there's any parallel between Milwaukee and Boston, it might be the kind of question of, did we really need to fire this head coach? There might be some players around, or there might be some people around saying, we scapegoated this guy, and, for whatever reason. Now, maybe his time had just run its course there, and you don't make a move like that without kind of Giannis Antetokounmpo's blessing. So that's a little bit different. And if Giannis is on board, everybody else has to get on board. That's how it goes. But if there's any sort of lingering kind of question, then that has the potential to throw at least like stop sticks in the road that could get you a flat tire along the way. So I think the important lesson out of this past season for Boston is, how do you make up for of experience on the sideline? Now, it's a little different because Adrian Griffin has been around and he's a former NBA guy. There's another major difference. Missoula, his only head coaching was Division III, or like he Division I. It was a low level college. Maybe it's Division II. I'm just going to average it all out and say it was Division II. It was low level, quick couple of seasons. He had a few seasons on the sideline. He didn't have that feel for the game. So I think one thing with Griffin is he has that type of feel for the game that is necessary for a new head coach. And not only is he coming into it with an NBA career behind him, he had an NBA career of like averaging 4 points a game.
Mm-hmm.
Like he had to be good at a lot of things. He had to see a lot of things. And this is where the comparison is more to Ime Udoka, I think, than Joe Missoula, because Griffin is the role player. Udoka was the role player. He spent a lot of time as an assistant coach, learning the game. He's been an assistant coach for 15 years or so. So he has a long track record playing bouncing around, coaching, bouncing around, learning from different players, learning from different coaches. So I think the greater comparison is for Griffin to come in and have that Udoka-like Rolodex of, I remember in this city, we did it this way. I remember this coach this way. I remember we had a guy who was pissed off about this exact same thing back in Toronto, and it was handled this way and it was wrong. I'm going to do it differently. He has that depth of knowledge that is going to be really, really important. Still a first-year head coach. It's still different in that seat. It's still different figuring out when you have to call the timeouts and when to get on the refs and when to yell at your team and all of that stuff. But he's been through it. Joe Missoula had none of that, and that hurt. And I think that's where I always referred to Missoula as a paint-by-numbers coach last year. He had his analytics. He knew what he wanted to do. He knew the three-point rate. He said to me specifically, three-point rate is the most important stat in the NBA. And it's like, well, is it really? But that's what he was going by. And so very long-winded answer to say that I don't see these as similar situations at all. I see it as much more much closer to what Udoka was in his first year in Boston. And he had a level of success because he knows how to deal with those stars. He's been around them all. He's been on this bench. He's been on other benches with big name, big ego guys. He kind of gets it. And that long history in the NBA gives him a wide swath of different styles. He's seen the NBA change and evolve. He knows a lot more about what works and what doesn't than Missoula does.
Yeah, and the Udoka point is also a valid one in the idea that the Bucks, maybe they won't be as stable as they have been during the regular season right from opening night, because we all know that Boston team, around 500, then they go on a big run. They were able to figure some stuff out, and obviously they were really good in the playoffs that year as well. So it's something to watch with Adrian Griffin. The one thing I would say as well, you made a good point about the assistant coaches. So Milwaukee, perhaps in preparation for a first-time head coach that may have some of those moments where it's like, okay, this is a lot. What's going on here? Terry Stotts is there, Joe Prunty, two guys that have been around. So I think for Bucks fans, that gives you a level of comfort. But if we just talk purely the roster, Chris Middleton, Brook Lopez, signing those guys was a big target. Other than that, you bring back Jay Crowder. We didn't really see anything of him last year. Malik Beasley, add to coming off the bench. So this is a team that was booted out in the first round last year. So as you look at it from the Celtics perspective, how do you view the Bucks?
Yeah, I mean, I still view the Bucks as dangerous. I think Giannis' injury is, I don't look at the Bucks Heat series as indicative of future results. Again, first of all, Giannis got hurt, and I don't think anybody took Miami very seriously. And Miami comes in with a chip on their shoulder. Hero goes out, and then all of a sudden, the guys who step in for Tyler Hero, rather than having a defensive liability out there that you can attack, you have better defenders who started shooting better than Tyler Hero ever did. You're like, what is going on? Like I saw it happening in Boston the same way you guys saw it happening in Milwaukee, and I was like, this can't last, right? This can't be happening all series long. And it just kept going and going and going. So you lose one because you don't take them very seriously. You lose a second one because it's like, all right, that was an average. Now you're like, oh, damn. Now they've got the confidence. Your main guy is hurt and not able to help you out as well as he should. Jason Tatum sprains his ankle in game 7, and that, ruins what would have been a historic comeback. I don't think Miami is that good to make that kind of run again. That was special. Congrats to them. They earned it, but they played above their heads. So Milwaukee, I don't see them as like on the decline per se, but I do see Milwaukee and Boston in the same boat in that this ain't lasting much longer because that second apron is hanging out there. And I think Milwaukee and Boston are two of the teams that are going to have tough decisions to make. You can't pay Giannis almost $50 million and Jrue Holiday like $40 million and, Chris Middleton, $30 million. Like it's just too much money. And the thing the Bucks have that Boston doesn't is an age issue where Boston's guys are still, Tatum and Brown are just entering their primes. Giannis is there, but Holiday is basically done. Lopez is basically done. How much time does Chris Middleton really have left at that high level? So you're relying on really kind of older players that have the older players in your team are more important than the older players on Boston's team, minus Al Horford, who might be minimized a little bit and brought to the bench. So that's, I think Milwaukee, Boston this upcoming season will still be a battle. It's just a matter of how much longer is Milwaukee, Boston going to be a battle. And if any team is going to maybe have really, really bad luck, I'm going to put it on Milwaukee, even though Boston's injury luck with Porzingis and all that is certainly right there. I think Milwaukee's age puts them a little bit ahead of Boston as far as risk to lose somebody much more important and kind of reshape the top of the East.
Seems fair, and we have seen it the last 2 years now. A little bit unlucky. Middleton slips in a wet spot. Giannis, Kevin Love tries to take a charge. Ridiculous play anyway. Lands on his back. So these things can happen. Accidents can happen. But we did discuss this on yesterday's show, and I still had, and keep in mind, yes, Miami probably a wild card. We'll wait and see what happens with that roster, and some things can change. Philadelphia, right, as of today, looks like a disaster. Who knows what happens there? So I still have Boston and Milwaukee on a tier of their own.
Yes.
You're coming with me with this line of thinking?
Yes, absolutely. And especially considering that Philadelphia is just not interested in taking any advantage of Boston. Kind of like Boston loses and they trade away their longest tenured player, their de facto captain, the former defensive player of the year, their starting point guard. Milwaukee loses, they trade away their head coach who had won a championship. I don't want to call it turmoil. There's not turmoil in these cities, but there's, I don't know, somewhere below upheaval, but above retooling. There's the Milwaukee Bucks and the Boston Celtics. There's somewhere in there where it's like a smattering of anxiety in these two cities. And here's Philadelphia ready, like, okay, you got Joel Embiid, the MVP, you got your guys, you got a team that played pretty well during the regular season. All you need to do is have James Harden back in the fold, and you can figure out along the way maybe minimums and something that can kind of support that, and they can't do it. James Harden is just blowing the whole thing up. Daryl Morey doesn't know what he's doing anymore. It's just ridiculous to see the Sixers in a position to kind of ascend into that top three. I don't even know if Joel Embiid is going to be on that roster by the end of the season. I think both those guys can go by the end of the season. Prime opportunity. And they're like, nope, we're not going to take it. So Boston and Milwaukee hanging out up top. I don't think Cleveland's going to be able to make that leap. I don't see anybody else. Unless Miami gets Damian Lillard, maybe they can kind of ascend to that third seed. But I don't know. Whoever the third seed is, just looking down that list, I'm not afraid of any of these teams. So I think once again, on paper, we head into this season, Milwaukee and Boston 1-2, and it's just a matter of what your zip code is. Who do you believe is 1 and who do you believe is 2?
Yeah, not perfect teams right now for all the reasons we've discussed on this show, but yet they just still do feel like they are above the rest. And we discussed this. Remember that little fleeting period of time when the Eastern Conference was back as a power?
Yeah. It was fun.
It doesn't feel like the case. It doesn't feel like that.
There's like 2 months last season. And it was like, whoa, and no, not anymore.
Hey, before we wrap this up, I need an update on an old friend of the Milwaukee Bucks, Malcolm Brogdon. And it's interesting because he came into last year a situation, a role that really is so perfect. And it's like, keep the minutes down, bring him off the bench, get him to the postseason healthy. And even still, he wasn't able to do so. Then there was the trade stuff. Then there's some reports of the relationship needs to be repaired. Where are we at with Malcolm Brogdon?
Yeah. Well, he currently is rehabbing that elbow forearm tendon thing that crushed him. Yeah. The snapping of a tendon in his arm or whatever that rendered him useless against Miami. It's so let's go back to the beginning with Brogdon. He came over as, recruited by Ime Udoka and Brad Stevens. And so he was always going to be a six man, but I don't know how much of the role was going to be different with Udoka, because Udoka, while accepting that 3-pointers are a huge part of the NBA, he just was not offense first. He was a defense. He is a defense first coach. So I think his points of emphasis were going to be a little bit different. And that means the late game execution was going to be different. The types of plays, the types of offense that they run late game was going to be different. Brogdon essentially came in as a shooter, and while he did get to the rim plenty, but he took a bunch of 3-pointers, and that was it. He didn't create for other people. He had trouble getting on the same page with Robert Williams, who missed almost half the season coming back from that meniscus surgery. He never really got there. We keep joking in Boston about how Brogdon never throws an alley-oop to Robert Williams. Just can't get that pass out. So that's going to have to be an adjustment moving forward. Then he gets hurt, and the trade thing happens. And there is some fence mending that needs to be done, because he was traded. That there's no doubt about it. The deal was done. And then the Clippers kind of like took too long to say, yes, we're 100% in on this. They're like, yeah, we'll do it. But hold on a second. And when time started to run out, because Porzingis had an extension that he needed to make a decision on, Boston pivoted and said, you know what? No time for you. We're going with Marcus Smart. He's more expendable. So we're going with Marcus Smart. And Brogdon was, I'm assuming that he was kind of told, you saw it. He saw it on social media. You had to, that he was traded. And now to not be traded, it's just, there's a hard feeling there that's going to be tough to recover from. So can he get over that? I mean, he's a pro. If you look up the definition of NBA pro in the dictionary, Brogdon's the guy. So I think he can get past it, but he also can do the math. He will not be a member of the Boston Celtics next season, because that $22 million, there's a reason why the $22 million, 22 and a half was going to be part of the trade, because it's the exact contract the Celtics need to move to stay below that second apron. Next season, you can move Brogdon and you can stay under that second apron and keep Brown, Porzingis, and Tatum for one more year, and then make your decision again after that, how you want to proceed. So Brogdon knows that even if you mend the fence, he's gone after this season anyway. So it's a very difficult situation, and he needs to be able to come in and mesh with Robert Williams. He needs to come in and be able to mesh with Jaylen Brown. The numbers with him and Jaylen Brown were not good. He needs to be able to be on the floor with Brown and Tatum, and that the trio of numbers. He was fine with Tatum because everybody's fine with Tatum. It's like playing with Jokic or something like that. You play with the best player, your plus minus is going to go up. But his plus minus with Brown on the floor was not good, and that needs to change. So is he going to come in and be committed enough for Boston to fix that so he can be on the floor late in a game, and you can have Brogdon, Derek White, Tatum, Brown, and Porzingis, and run maybe a little bit more traditional pick and roll, but also have floor spacing everywhere? If he can't do that, Boston's going to be in trouble. But if he can do that and get through it and say, hey, I'll suck it up one more season, maybe I can get out of here with a ring, and then next summer you can trash Boston in the media, that's fine. But that's going to be one of the questions where that Boston's going to have to figure out this season.
My partner, Frank Madden, on this podcast is smiling when you're talking about Malcolm Brogdon not making the right pass, because he, on every single one of these podcasts, would say, Brogdon, get the ball to Giannis in transition. Don't hold on to the ball. It was a running bit on this podcast for a long, long time. And a fine player. But so far to this point,
not a pass first.
Hasn't been able to stay healthy. Hasn't been able to do that. Just not quite there.
Yeah, they need him to just be able to make that next right play.
Yep.
And I think that's the same thing. It's the same Brogdon, where he would turn a corner and a guy would be open and you say, "Ooh, there it is." And maybe he'd get to the rim anyway. But there were plenty of times over the course of the season, it was like, yeah, he's going for Malcolm Brogdon. For all of he's a pro, he's the president, he's like all this great stuff. He is kind of a selfish player.
Yes, well, hey, as I said, there will be many Bucks fans that I remember back to those days when he was awesome for the Bucks as well. This is Rookie of the Year, Malcolm
also
Brogdon.
Very good. Yeah, Sixth Man of the Year, Malcolm Brogdon. Very good, but also not 100% of what Boston wanted. And so that extra 15% is going to be the difference between maybe the getting to the finals versus losing in the conference finals.
Well, as I said right from the top, and we do this all the time, and we have so many topics to talk about with the Bucks and the Celtics, because right now, if I had to pick, and so many things can happen, but it still looks like these are going to be the 1 and 2 teams that the rest of the East is chasing throughout the season. So I'm sure we'll do it again through the regular season. John,
absolutely,
always a pleasure, my friend.
Yeah, same here, man. Thanks for having me on, and looking forward to many more of these during the course of the season.
All right, make sure you check out Locked On Bucks and Locked On Celtics, rolling right through the offseason. The regular season will be here before we know it. We will catch you both tomorrow.